Hi, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. We've got a good number of folks that have joined us. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today for the 2023 edition of the BISAC Subject Code Update. We're very fortunate to have Connie Harbison, our committee chair, who's worked with subject codes for a very long time and done incredible work to make this information relevant and timely for the industry along with our committee. We just want to thank her for the incredible work that she's done, and thank you all for being here today. Today, we're going to cover a conversation on best practices as well as updates to the 2023 list. This meeting will be recorded and distributed via email for all those who have attended. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll get to those at the end of today's session, and I'm more than happy to address those. And we'll have a good conversation about the updates, best practices, and all things BISAC. Connie, I know that you have a lot of information to present today, so we can go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for your time and your work here.
Thanks, Brooke. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I have a pretty packed agenda today, so I'm going to go rather quickly. If there's anything that you need me to go back to, just put it in the chat, and Brooke will let me know. So on today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the committee itself, who we are and what we do. We'll talk about new additions in general, the timing of new additions and what's included in a new addition. We'll go through the highlights of the 2023 edition. We'll look at merchandising themes. And then we'll talk a little about best practices for assigning heading. And lastly, if you want to request a new heading. So the BISAC Subject Committee, who we are, we're a group. We represent all different segments of the book industry, including publishers, wholesalers, retailers, and everyone holds varying positions within their company. There's no, level position you have to be to, to participate. We have all different levels. Just two common threads, actually. One common thread is that we're all passionate about books and metadata. And the second thing we all have in common is that we are volunteers. So we all have day jobs, but enjoy this so much. We take the time out of our schedules to meet. And the mission of the BISAC Subject Committee is to maintain the subject headings, merchandising themes, and the regional themes, as well as providing guidance on the implementation and use of the standards. Who can join the committee? Anyone who's employed by a BISG member company is allowed to join on the committee. And if you're not a BISG member, you want to contact Brian. And one of the benefits of being a BISG member is that you get the download of the entire subject file included in your membership, and that's you get the Word files and Excel files, and the new edition is now available in that download. Some of the values of being a member of our committee. You can drive discussions on changes you think are of value in the industry, and share and hear real use cases to help the committee make better informed decisions, and bring expertise on subject matter in which your company may specialize. And we'll talk a little about that when I go into the new list. I'll expand on that a little more. This is about I had the 29th, but I think it might be the 30th version of the codes. First edition was released to the public in 1994. And the list has grown significantly over the years, and the earliest list was 1993, 1994, and that had 1900 codes, and in the 2023 edition, we're at 5,500 codes. So the growth is quite significant over the years. An average growth since version 2 is about 20%. Or I'm sorry, it was about 3.6% per year. When we're creating a new edition, we make minor revisions throughout our cycle to each section based on need, something in the news, something changes, and incoming requests. We also choose specific sections within the list that we revise on a cyclical basis. Some of them, like computers, may need to be reviewed more often than something like antiques and collectibles. And then in the fall, we release the new version of the list. So the timeline of the edition is this: we discuss headings, we discuss the new edition around October to August or September. And we close the edition in August or September. This year we closed it around September 29th. And in October, the proposal is distributed to General BISAC for approval, or I'm sorry, to General BISG membership. And in November, it's circulated to the Board of Directors for final approval. And once that's approved, I put together the Word version and the Excel version, and the edition gets released by BISG. So while this edition is getting released now, we're in the process of already discussing the 2024 edition. These two, the release and discussions on the new edition, overlap. If anyone's unfamiliar with BISAC, it's the code is a 9-character alphanumeric code, and the literal is in the form of top-level section slash subheading, and there could be multiple subheadings. We go as to the most 3. I should say 2 subheadings. So you can have, say, it's something like computers, internet blogging, I don't know, Instagram. We could add that, but we don't really go past 4 levels. And the first 3 characters of the code represent the section, such as CKB represents cooking, but you can't read the number as a hierarchical number. The codes are intended for use in electronic files, and the literals are intended for print and display purposes. One of the things that I'm going to talk about, or I will mention a lot during this presentation, is I'll use the terms trees and branches. And before I go on and use those terms, I just want to make sure everybody knows what I'm referring to. This is the levels of a heading. It can be the main topic, and then it can have 1 subheading, 2 subheadings, 3 subheadings below it. And so fiction would be the main topic, and that cannot be used alone, but we would call that the tree, fiction tree. And mystery and detective is a level below fiction. So that's the mystery and detective tree. Within the mystery and detective tree is the cozy tree. Although mystery and detective has many branches, which are the subheadings, cozy is one of those. And another branch of cozy would be animals. So when you're assigning subjects, you want to drill down as specifically as possible. You know, the most useful subject will always be the most specific. And if you're assigning a very specific BISAC, then you don't need to assign the general as well. So if you're assigning fiction, mystery and detective, cozy, animals, there's no reason to also include fiction, mystery and detective, cozy, general. I mentioned the numbers as well, about the subject numbers. In some cases, they can be looked at as a hierarchy. The numbers and headings as trees are made and headings are moved around over time, literals change, they get moved around in the list. So at one point, history 026 was simply history Middle East. And around version 2.6, it was made into a tree. And the headings that were added to that tree are in sequential order, 10, 20, 30, 40. But because there were other standalone headings that were part of the Middle East, they got moved into that tree. Thus, there you have three numbers which fall out of the numeric sequence. So you can't use the numbers to, you can't rely on the numbers for the hierarchy. In the 2023 edition, the naming convention of each edition is the year it is created and closed. So even though we're in December of 2023, this is the 2023 edition, which will be used in 2024 mostly. And we close this edition at the end of September. And as I said, it's the 29th or 30th edition of the BISAC subjects. And the BISG office should be getting an email out shortly announcing the new edition. Each new edition contains literal changes, inactivations, new headings, and reactivations. Not all editions have a reactivation. There's none in this edition. Reactivation is when a code was made inactive, and then it's decided that we need that literal back. So we'll use the same code if instead of adding a new code with that same literal, we'll just reactivate it. And when we make literal changes, we make those to update a literal to a more common or acceptable term, to organize like headings into hierarchical trees. We update a literal to expand or clarify the scope of a heading. And we update literals to sometimes reduce the scope of a heading. One thing we had some time ago, we had a heading in cooking for vegetarian, and over the years it was and vegan was added to that literal. So that was a case of us expanding the literal. And then over the years, we decided to take vegan out and make that its own heading. So in that case, we reduced the scope of vegetarian again, because the vegan books had a new heading to go to. So this is the breakdown of what is in the 2023 edition. It was a very significant edition. There were a significant number of adds and changes to it. We added almost 300 new headings, made 210 literal changes, inactivated 16, and we added 40 new headings to merchandising themes and 11 literal changes to the merchandising themes. So of the 37 top level sections, or of the 54 top level sections, 37 had at least one change or addition, with the top 5 sections with additions and changes being comics and graphic novels, cooking, juvenile fiction, young adult fiction, and juvenile nonfiction. This is the breakdown of the headings added. The 35 sections had a heading added. As usual, fiction has the most headings added, and followed by this, in this edition, comics and graphic novels. And for literal changes, cooking had the most literal changes, followed by juvenile nonfiction, young adult nonfiction, young adult fiction. And this is just a breakdown of the top sections that were updated. As I said, comics and graphic novels had the most changes and updates, and we inactivated several headings there. And we made a lot of changes in cooking. We didn't add a lot, but we made a lot of literal changes there. So today, in the new edition, we'll look at the comics and graphic novels section, the psychology section, the drama section, performing arts section, and at DEI headings. For people who aren't sure what DEI is, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as I think I mentioned before, like sometimes we have experts come into our meetings to talk about their niche, their so we had several experts come in for this edition. We had all people from all these companies come in. We had some comic and graphic novel experts. We had the American Psychological Association, and to talk about some of the DEI headings, we had Chickasaw Press, Empowering Latino Futures, and BookNet Canada. So to start, comics and graphic novels that had 34 new headings, 18 literal changes, and 13 inactivations. Our experts, we had in experts in this section. We had in a gentleman named Jim Killen, and he used to be the graphic novel buyer at Barnes & Noble. And now he is an editor at large at Rebellion Publishing. And we had a gentleman named Andrew Woodrow Butcher, who is the director of library services for company The Beguiling. And He develops graphic collections for schools and libraries across Canada. And he also manages a comic book shop, which just for kids. It's called Little Island Comics. So with their help, we created a tree for East Asian style. The tree includes branches for manga, manhwa, and manhwa. We also added a heading for European style. And we left manga-specific headings within the manga tree. So headings such as Magical Girl, Mecha, Yaoi, Yuri, we left those within the manga tree if the topic is specifically for manga. We inactivated 13 manga headings. This included manga fantasy, manga horror, manga romance, manga science fiction. All of these headings have a standalone duplicate heading. So they have a heading outside of the manga tree. So for example, we inactivated manga dystopian, but we still have dystopian. So that was a pretty big change. And, you know, what do you need to do with this change? You know, why was it made and what do you need to do? It was made, the comic and graphic novel section now has headings for 4 styles. And we wanted to avoid creating a tree for each style. The list gets very unruly if you have, you know, a subheading for each style and then a subheading for the genre. So you might have, you know, we don't want to have 4 science fictions within the list, or, you know, just keep repeating the same list for each style. So we broke some of the headings out of the style. They were under the manga tree. And what do you need to do? If you're familiar with the humor section, the comic and graphic novel section is now very similar to the humor section. The humor section has a form tree and a style tree. So now if you have manga or manhwa, you have to use multiple headings to fully describe your title. So you need to reclassify headings from the manga genre headings to manga general and a standalone genre. And there's not really a rule for which one to put as BISAC 1. You know, you would have to determine which one is the most important for your book. So an example of what you need to do in the comics and graphic novel section, you have all these books and they are classified as comics and graphic novels, manga, horror. But we inactivated comics and graphic novels, manga, horror. So now you need to reclassify this book as comics and graphic novels, East Asian style, manga, general, and comics and graphic novels, horror. There is a table in the downloaded edition of version of the codes. There is a table for inactivated codes, and that's that table is from the beginning of BISAC. So all inactivated codes are in there, and there's also an instruction on what to do with an inactivated code. So if you see CGN 004 150 in the inactive list, the notes would tell you reclassify with CGN 004 050 and CGN 004 040. In the psychology section, we had assistance and feedback from the American Psychological Association. We added 19 new headings, made 9 literal changes, and 2 inactivations. We had a movements tree, which we got rid of, and we merged it into the psychotherapy tree. So all the headings that had movements were, the literals were changed to psychotherapy. So this is what the psychotherapy tree looked like in the 2022 edition. And then we made our literal changes. And so it looked like that with all the literal changes. And then we added quite a number of headings into that section. So everything in red is our new headings. So now the psychotherapy section looks like this. We also changed the literals for education and training to education, training, and supervision, and of ethnopsychology to cultural psychology. In addition to adding the psychotherapy headings, we added all these headings to psychology as well. Give you a moment to let those sink in. Next up, we have the drama section. In the drama section, we added 10 new headings and made 2 literal changes. These were our new headings. These are our new headings and literal changes in drama. And most of these, about half of these, are DEI related. The literal changes were that we changed drama Indigenous peoples in the Americas to drama Indigenous. And we changed drama religious and liturgical to drama type religious and liturgical. So because we created a type tree, we moved religious and liturgical into it. And I just wanted to call out on this drama, this type tree. In most cases, you will see a tree starting with the term general as the 3rd level. However, in this case, in a case like this, it doesn't make sense to have a heading drama type general. That's pretty much the same as drama general. So in this section, you'll see that there is no drama type general, and we know that there isn't one, and we did that on purpose to leave it out. In the performing arts section, there's 9 new headings and 1 literal change. There's our all the changes. We had dance, regional, and cultural, which was changed to regional, ethnic. And we added some film genres, television genres. And as we were going through the list, we tried to remove the term ethnic from all the literals. Some felt the term was insensitive and can be seen as marginalizing and offensive. So we tried to remove that from as many places in the list as possible, which was why we had so many changes in cooking, because we changed the a huge tree within cooking. So on that note, I wanted to look at a few of the DEI related additions and literal changes. We added 129 DEI related new headings and 167 DEI related literal changes. And as I mentioned, in the literal changes, we tried to remove the term ethnic. So in biography and autobiography, we totally removed the cultural, ethnic, and regional tree. And we made all the headings from that tree into standalone headings. For example, we had biography and autobiography, cultural, ethnic, and regional, African American, and Black. And that heading is now biography and autobiography, African American, and Black. In this, for these codes, the meaning doesn't change at all for these codes, so you don't need to do anything for bio 002, 010, because the heading still has the same meaning. I mentioned cooking. We have 46 changes in cooking, and we changed everything in the regional and ethnic tree to regional and cultural. An example, cooking regional and ethnic Asian is now cooking regional and cultural Asian. In the juvenile and young adult sections, we made quite a number of changes to each one. And this is because we reworked the people and places tree in all of these sections. People were moved out from the tree to standalone headings, and places was made into its own tree. So for all 4 of these sections, there's no longer a people and places tree, just a places tree. Some examples. Juvenile fiction, people and places, United States, Hispanic and Latino is now juvenile fiction, Hispanic and Latino. Juvenile fiction, people and places, Canada is now juvenile fiction, places, Canada. Juvenile nonfiction, people and places, United States, Middle Eastern, and Arab American is now just juvenile nonfiction, Middle Eastern, and Arab American. And juvenile nonfiction, people and places, Middle East is now juvenile nonfiction, places, Middle East. And the changes made in the young adult fiction and nonfiction sections mirror these changes. In social sciences, we made 14 changes. In this case, we changed the ethnic studies tree to cultural and ethnic studies. So why did we retain the heading ethnic studies? Because there's many universities that still use that heading as for their departments. Here's an example of the change we made. Social science, ethnic studies, Caribbean and Latin American studies becomes social science, cultural and ethnic studies, Caribbean and Latin American studies. And all of these universities have ethnic studies programs. So for social sciences, we decided to keep ethnic studies because it is a known term within academia. So, there's people publishing books, are probably used to that term. And there was at least one DEI heading added to 30 sections. Fiction got 32, young adult fiction 26, juvenile nonfiction 23, juvenile fiction 21, young adult nonfiction 17, comics and graphic novels 13, history 9, religion 8, political science 6, drama 5. Those are just the top ones. And this is the breakdown for the headings that we added. As you can see, we added a huge percentage of, or a huge percent of the headings we added are related to Indigenous people. And this is because the Indigenous Subjects Working Group, which is coordinated by BookNet Canada, got together and discussed improving representation of Indigenous titles. And this representation is very meaningful for the publishing sector in Canada. And because our list is a North American list for both the US and Canada, we added those codes. The working group came to us with a very thoroughly researched presentation, and why they needed the codes, how the codes differed, how the headings differed from what already existed. So in some cases, it's not just adding a tree to say, oh, here's fiction Indigenous, which we did, but also we added headings throughout the list for sometimes just Indigenous topics that were specific to Indigenous people, and they wanted to look for those topics specifically. So we added new trees. One was for Hispanic and Latino headings, and these are in fiction. And we added quite a number of headings within that tree. And we added quite a lot under the Indigenous tree. And what I was trying to say before was a heading like fiction, Indigenous, oral storytelling and teachings. That was a very specific heading that those publishers needed, and to describe their books, to best describe their books. And so we added it. And so I guess the takeaway is, if you have a group, any kind of grouping to add to, we're always looking to add new DEI headings. So if you have suggestions on that, it's not, as I said, with comic and graphic novels, it's not just taking every DEI heading and making it into a tree and then adding every single genre under that heading. In most cases, we will consider what we're adding, so we don't have, just 5 trees with all the same headings under it. We'll consider whether there are titles within that, that there are, in fact, Indigenous fiction, Indigenous city life novels. And so if people sometimes ask us about why, or criticize, I should say, the BISAC list, because it has a lot of Christian headings. And what I say to them is, a group of Christian publishers came to us a few years back and did a very thorough presentation on what their needs are and how they needed to use the list. And because the Christian industry is, a huge portion of the publishing industry, we listened to their recommendations. So again, if you want, if you're looking to have something, add several headings, or say, oh, you have a lot of Christian headings, or you have a lot of, Indigenous headings, but you don't have a lot of these headings, we don't just duplicate the lists. We consider everything we add. In juvenile and young adult, in juvenile fiction and nonfiction, we added all of these headings, several new comic and graphic novels headings within juvenile fiction. We added a bunch of holidays and celebrations within juvenile fiction and nonfiction. And we added pretty similar headings in young adult fiction and nonfiction. The same comics and graphic novels headings, and we also added in young adult fiction an Indigenous tree and an LGBTQ plus tree. And in young adult nonfiction, we added an Indigenous tree. So in addition to all these great new headings and changes that I've talked about, we do regularly receive just general requests from people about what they might want to see. This is from people within the committee and people outside of the committee. So some of those like one-off suggestions we added are new to the list. And I just wanted to call out, the one I wanted to call out was political science, public policy, gun and firearm policy. And we grappled a little with what that heading should be, and we talked about having it be gun control, and then felt like, oh, people might see that as a political viewpoint. So we try to make the headings pretty neutral, because a heading like that, gun and firearm policy, can be for a book that's against firearms, or it could be for a book that's pro firearms. It's not saying what side of the argument the book is about. It's just saying that's what it is about. So I mentioned that we made a lot of additions to the merchandising themes. And I'm not sure if people really know what the merchandising themes are. And they are a list of terms representing frequently requested merchandising themes and topics, so that various organizations within the book industry can assemble materials appropriate to that theme or topic. So meaning if you are if you have a physical bookstore and you want to make a table for a certain holiday, if people are sending you merchandising themes, you can better find books from every subject heading to put in your display. And I'll give you some examples of those. So the merchandising themes should be used in addition to the subject codes. They shouldn't be used alone. So if you're sending merchandising themes, you should send them with the subject codes. It's an optional field. It kind of modifies the subject code. And as I said, this allows you to bring together very dissimilar topics into one grouping. So there's 5 types of merchandising themes. Well, we added, there's 124 merchandising themes, and we added 40 are new to this edition. There's 41 codes for cultural heritage, 25 codes for events, 34 for holidays, 3 codes for publisher type, and this is the codes there are academic and university, independent, and self-published. So and this was to help the independent booksellers identify books that are published by independent publishers. And the last one, topical, has 21 codes. And I'll go through these briefly and show you some examples. So cultural heritage, some examples of those are African American and Black, Australian, Chinese, Cuban, French, German, Hispanic and Latino, Mexican, Native American. And so say you had a group of books and you want to assign them the merchandising theme, cultural heritage China. All of these books here, although they're all in different sections of the subject list, could all get cultural heritage China. For events, we have some examples are anniversary, back to school, birthday, graduation, Pride Month, Super Bowl, and teacher appreciation. So if you have if graduation's coming up, the merchandising themes would allow you to, tie together a bunch of books that may be about graduation or be helpful to a graduate. And holidays, we added a lot of holidays. Some examples are Cinco de Mayo, Diwali, Election Day, Father's Day, Juneteenth, Lunar New Year, Rosh Hashanah, St. Patrick's Day, Thanksgiving, Valentine's Day. And I have two examples of this one to show, mainly because I did this slide and then I thought, oh, I should have showed something else. And then I didn't want to throw the slide away. So this is how the books that could be, the type of books that could be brought together by holiday Juneteenth, and that can be fiction books, and that can be children's books and biographies, history books. But then the second example I wanted to use was Father's Day. And Father's Day, you could use a merchandising theme on any book that you would think might be of interest to a father. And, I pulled out some books that I thought, might be of interest and that were very diverse from each other. And, we have everything from dad jokes to the ultimate Star Wars, some crossword books, do-it-yourself books. So again, this would be like, say you want to make a display or you want to highlight, if you have a website, something, books that are appropriate for Father's Day. And by using a merchandising theme, you could bring together all those books. And lastly, we had topical. And some examples of topical are banned books, Black history, Christian interest, LGBTQ+, own voices, social media personalities, teen, and women's interest. And so if you had topical LGBTQ+, these are the types of books you can bring together. So that pretty much does it for the new list and what's included in the 2023 edition. I wanted to go over a few best practices for the subject, codes, questions we get asked a lot, and just some basic do's and don'ts of the code list. So one question we get a lot, should I use multiple headings? And the answer is yes, you should always use multiple headings when it's applicable, because sometimes there is no single right subject, or different customers may approach your titles from different angles. You want to cover every aspect of your title. But you don't want to use a general and specific from the same tree. I mentioned that earlier. So a lot of people don't like to use multiple subjects or multiple codes, but it's perfectly fine. Most retailers can, or most data aggregators can take multiple codes. So the number of subject codes per ISBN is just, it depends on the structure of a database, the database housing the record. There's in Onyx, there's no limitation to the number of codes you can send. But it's unusual to assign more than 3. So sometimes a book just needs one subject, and say it's about knitting, crafts and hobbies, needlework, knitting. That's it. That's the only subject that book really needs. But some books, may benefit from having multiple subjects. Say you had a book about Walt Disney World. You might want to put on that travel, special interest, amusement, and theme parks, as well as travel, United States, South Atlantic. Or if you have a book of political speeches, say by Hillary Clinton, a book like that could get literary collections, speeches, as well as political science, women in politics. As I said, a lot of people don't think they can or should be sending multiple subjects. And when we get requests for new headings, people will, request something like, I don't know, romance. We have romance, historical, but then they might request historical romance. And, it's basically the same heading in a different order. So we just can't add every heading in every order. If your book is a romance and it's a historical and, something else, science fiction, you would need to add 3 headings. We're not going to add additional headings just so we get every combination possible. And that's going back to the manga. That was the idea there. And when you're assigning, and some of the best practices when you are assigning the subject, should be based on the book's content, not on the merchandising plans. That would be for the merchandising themes. You want to assign the most precise subject in order of importance. And just remember that the most specific BISAC is always the best. We have a number of logical guidelines for best practices as well. Some of these would be, do not mix fiction and nonfiction headings. So if you have a book that is historical fiction, you would want to put fiction historical on it and not a history heading as well. Use the subjects in fiction section for individual works of fiction or for collections of fiction. And juvenile, young adult, and adult headings should not be mixed within each other. So the BISAC should match the audience. If you have a book that's for grades 4 to 6, it should be getting juvenile. If it's 10 to 12, it should be getting young adult. And if it's just general audience, then it should be getting one of the adult headings. Subjects in the foreign language study section. That should be about works for the language specified. You shouldn't be using that subjects in that section to indicate the language of a work. There's already a field in Onyx for you to send the language of the work. So, again, keep in mind to classify based on the subject content and not what the language is, unless the subject is teaching a language. The headings, the sections for health and fitness and medical, one is used for non-professionals, and the other is used more for professionals, healthcare professionals. And so, you have your health and fitness books about, that you might see in a bookstore and about diet or exercise. But you wouldn't put those in the medical section, and just as you wouldn't put a medical textbook in the health and fitness section. And other combinations that kind of follow this, a lay person versus a professional, would be nature and science and self-help and psychology. It doesn't mean you can't use those together. It's just a best practice not to. So I've talked a lot about people suggesting headings and headings that we've added based on suggestions, people making presentations to us. So you're probably wondering what to do if you have a suggestion for a new heading that you want to see added. Anyone can request a heading. You don't have to be a BISG member. And we'll talk about all the requests and consider them. However, sometimes the requests come in and they're very vague, or they're not very clear, or they don't specify what section they're for. When you're submitting suggestions, you want to consider whether the heading could be applied to at least 100 unique ISBNs currently in publication. And you want to consider whether that would be used by all publishing companies. Consider if your suggestion is too narrow or too broad. And before you make that suggestion, you want to look through the existing headings to see that something with a comparable heading doesn't already exist. And if you want to, sometimes we get in suggestions like you need a top level section on geography, and any suggestions for a new top level subject should be supported by research and have support from other publishers, and can present it to the committee in person. For example, some time ago, we added the design section, and we had a number of representatives from art publishers come in and make that presentation to us. Again, you want to just look to see if a comparable heading exists. So where do you go to submit a suggestion? The BASG website has a form for suggestions. I just revised the form, so I think it has better instructions on it for how to complete it. I also wanted to mention that if you want to submit a suggestion, to keep in mind that you shouldn't submit a suggestion for something just because you think it's not represented within the list. Again, it goes by the number, a lot of times it's the number of books, what segments of the industry need. Sometimes we get suggestions, and the person suggesting for examples, they'll just list their own books. We do need examples to talk about your request. So this is an example of the form. If you're asking for a literal change or a new heading, you would say what section you want that in, and say, let us know what your suggested heading is, and provide examples. And you don't have to type out every example. If you just have a link to a website or something with all the examples, that's helpful as well. And this is if you are requesting a literal change. When you're requesting a literal change, it's best if you give us the code so we know which one you're talking about, what that change is, and why you want that change, or why you think that change is important. But whenever requesting, examples are very important. We look for, as I said, multiple authors. We look for multiple publishers, not just one publisher that publishes on that subject. And we like to see that titles are still in print on that subject and still being published on that subject. So that is all I have. So if Brooke has any questions, I see the chat and Q&A has been filling up, so you're on mute, Brooke.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you so much for taking the time to go over this with us and provide this presentation. We really, really value the time and effort that has gone into this and all the work that you've done. This was very informative. As you've mentioned, we do have a lot of questions coming in. I do want to be, mindful of people's time as we are running a little bit over. But let's dive into some of these things because there is a lot of good tie-in and good value here. One of the more recent questions is from Nicole, mentioning that there's a lot of crossover with young adult fiction and adult fiction these days, and books often do have headings from both areas. What would be your guidance here?
The guidance would be, if it's, you want to code it with the audience it was intended for. So if it's a crossover, like something like Twilight, where it's a young adult novel, but a lot of adults are reading it, it would still get a young adult heading. If it's something like a Stephen King novel that a lot of young adults are reading, it would still get an adult heading because the original audience intended is adult.
Great, thank you. Troy has also asked if there is a single free resource of information for the BISAC codes and ISBNs. Where should people go if they're looking for more information?
The BISG website has FAQs for assigning BISAC, some what to do, in terms of looking at the inactive list, or can't think of anything else, but yes. So I would go to the BISG website and look at the FAQs for the subjects.
Folks are also welcome to reach out to us. Connie has her email address here. You can also always reach out to BISG directly with questions about the code list, and we'll collaborate together to make sure that you get the information that you need. I've also seen some interest in the Q&A about folks that are concerned if the codes for their books have changed in this update, what are their next steps? Do they need to do anything?
If there's just a literal change, the code should not change. When we change literals, we do not change the codes. The only time we would change the code is if we were splitting, if we had a literal that was something, and we were splitting that into two headings. So one would keep the code and one would get the new code. The only time you need to recode is when something goes inactive. So in this edition, the only place you're going to have to put some work into is comics and graphic novels. That will involve some reclassifying because we inactivated so many headings there. If you have titles that, now there's suddenly a heading that's appropriate to that title and there wasn't before, that's up to you to, want to go back to those, to any backlist and assign the new appropriate headings. But you should only be changing codes if something goes inactive or if the scope of something changes. And in the Excel version of the list, there is a tab on the spreadsheet for a scope reduction where it tells you like what to do if there's a scope reduction on a code.
Great, thank you for that. Is there anything specific that self-publishers and very small indie publishers should kind of take away separate from the information here as far as best practices goes or resources?
I would say no to best practices. I mean, the best practices, they would just apply to anyone trying to classify a book. I would say the BISG website has all the codes. They're in the process of updating for the 2023 edition. I think they should have that done within the next few days, but they have the list of all the codes and literals on their website. So you can go through those and, you can go in a section and look what's most appropriate for your book. On the website though, it's not really searchable throughout the list. So really the best thing to do is to get the license for the whole list to download. So then you have a searchable version. But no, there's really not anything different than an independent publisher should do or a self-publisher should do in terms of applying a subject.
Okay, great, thank you. When would you recommend implementing new codes? Ben has mentioned that in his experience, some data recipients take a while to recognize new codes. Is there a waiting period after the codes are publicly available that folks should wait before implementing them and sending that data forward?
No, absolutely not. You can start implementing the codes as soon as possible. Speaking from putting my Baker and Taylor hat on, we try to implement the codes. It takes there's a little work involved in implementing them and getting them added to our database. So sometimes we can't, get them added within days of the release. Sometimes it might take a couple weeks, but there's no rule for when you need to implement. So, a company like Random House could implement tomorrow, and we would get those codes and they wouldn't be in our database yet, so we couldn't apply those codes yet. So it's really not everybody's going to be updating on their own schedule.
Looking ahead for 2024, are there any particular topics that we're going to be evaluating for review for the next code list? Brenton has asked if there's any specific plans to move Native American language studies and or indigenous languages of the Americas out from under the foreign language studies heading due to DEI concerns.
We're talking about changing the actual top level heading for foreign language study to just language study. That's something on our discussion list for 2024 edition. And we had a number of topics that we were a list of topics we were going to discuss, but I don't have that notebook handy right now. But yeah, foreign language study was definitely on that list.
Great. Can we talk just a little bit more about merchandising codes? I know that this is something that's very near and dear to your own heart. There's definitely been some interest in the Q&A about that. Folks are not super familiar with it, interested in how to implement it in conjunction with, you know, the regular subject codes. Also some interest in how BISAC and Onyx work and play together.
So for the merchandising themes, unfortunately, a lot of people have not implemented them yet, which is, you know, it's unfortunate because they are a really great tool, especially with the addition of so many new headings and bringing together all those, all of the DEI titles. There, you know, there's all kinds of interests and holidays, and you know, so just to bring together groupings of titles, you know, like you can send those, like you can send the merchandising themes, say in an Onyx feed, they have their own type, their own subject code type. So you could send the codes, but recipients aren't necessarily going to take those codes. So again, go back to Baker and Taylor, and as Brooke said, this is very near and dear to my heart. You know, I've been begging the powers that be to add these codes to our database. You know, pretty much they know what I'm going to say before I say it, and we still have not gotten them added yet. So at Baker and Taylor, we unfortunately would not be able to take those codes. I've heard from another member of the committee who works for Barnes & Noble that Barnes & Noble is working on accepting those codes, which would be great. You know, just a great start for the industry. But I hopefully with the help of BISG, we're going to do a little more promotion of the codes in the coming year.
Great. This is something that as a former bookseller and just in my work in support of BISG, I'm also very personally excited about. So that's a development that we will be tracking very closely. We do have some more questions in the chat, but I think that now is a good point to kind of circle back and wrap things up. Any questions that are left unanswered, we can always, you know, follow up and include information about for folks. So Connie, I just want to thank you so much for your commitment to this important work, all of the value that you have contributed to the book industry. Any closing thoughts?
You know, I just I thank you, Brooke, but I don't do it all myself. You know, we have a pretty terrific committee. We have a lot of long-term members who are, as I said, very passionate about subjects and metadata. And, you know, so I thank those people for all of their help. We actually, just as an aside, we actually have one person who's retired from their company, but still participates on the committee because he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave the committee. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I will do the best I can to answer. And thank you all for attending. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Like I said, this recording will be made publicly available and distributed, so you can always revisit it. And, you know, Connie and us here at BSG are always happy to answer questions and help solve problems. So thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.